Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian, and today we are taking a look at an extremely unusual and extremely rare Norwegian pistol. This is a Bjorgum pistol, and I don't even know exactly what its designation is, although my best guess is that it is a model of 1905. So what we've got going on here, this is a pistol made by a guy named Niels Bjorgum. He was born in 1864 in Norway, and ultimately died in 1949, so lived to the ripe old age of 85. And what's kind of funny, how's this for a way to start? He was a professional painter and artist. He was classically trained as a painter, and he was actually a successful and recognized painter in the 1880s and the early 1890s. Had some exhibitions, traveled abroad to practice and study, and then got interested in firearms. And in the 1890s, from like 1894 until 1899, he was particularly interested in rifle manufacture and construction. And he came up with his own bolt-action rifle design and tried to propose it to the Army, but his timing was really quite bad because the Norwegians had adopted the Krag-Jorgensen rifle in 1894. So they'd just gotten done trialing guns and testing them and picked one, done, that's going to be it for a long time. So after he finally accepted that, well, he kind of got interested in pistols instead. Now remember, he has no engineering training, no machining training. He kind of came into this as a neophyte, interested in the subject. So he got interested in pistols. He creates his model of 1904 pistol, which is apparently a blow-forward action, quite unusual. It's chambered for the 7.63 Mauser cartridge, which is relatively powerful still in 1904. And it holds either 8 or 16 rounds. It's not entirely clear. And the Army actually informally tested it. They fired all of 16 rounds through it and determined it was 75% reliable. They had 4 malfunctions in 16 rounds, and there were a wide variety of types of malfunction. They had a failure to feed, they had a round get stuck while either feeding or extracting, they had some that failed to fire when the firing pin was hit. Bunch of problems. But he went back and started tinkering, and in 1905 he approached the Norwegian Parliament, or their version of a parliament at the time, with a request that they should finance him to develop these 3 different pistol design ideas he had, as well as a self-loading rifle. And he basically wanted them to pay for the work, and he wanted to work in the Kongsberg rifle factory, where he could have the tooling and the machinists and everyone there to help support him doing his work in firearms. Now, interestingly, he managed to get a supporter in the parliament, a guy named Captain Julsrud. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And Captain Julsrud wrote him a pretty glowing report on his pistol. Basically that, yeah, it had some issues. His 1905 design specifically had some issues, but he really thought they could be worked out and this would be a really good service pistol for Norway. Norway didn't have a semi-auto service pistol at this time, and they were interested in that. So he managed to convince the Norwegian Parliament to fund him to the tune of 7,000 Norwegian kroner. To put that in context, a colonel's salary at that time was about 5,500 kroner per year. You could make a Krag-Jorgensen rifle and bayonet for 57 kroner. So what the Parliament was basically paying for was the equivalent of 125 Krag rifles in exchange for developing these 4 prototype ideas. So Bjorgum works in the Kongsberg arsenal for 2 years, 1905 and 1906, and he's working on his pistols and he's getting advice from the guys there and he's making progress, sort of. And it sounds like the actual employees and the director of the arsenal were really kind of unhappy with this situation. They were getting a little fed up. This guy really had come in with no firearms experience, and he was making weird, crazy experiments. He was doing things in a way that just didn't make any sense to the professionals there who had long experience manufacturing firearms. And not really surprisingly, the guns he was turning out really weren't working. So his 1905 pistol, ultimately the Army did test a version of it. They put 50 rounds through it before they discontinued the test and said this thing was just totally unfit for service for a variety of reasons. And you'll see exactly why when we take a close look at this. I think this is a model of 1905 or part of one. Anyway, 1907, he comes back, he's run out of money, he's looking for more funding, he wants another 5,000 kroner, and Parliament kind of puts him off this time. They procrastinate and they kind of try and avoid this issue, and he instead manages to go out and find some private funding instead. So he's back able to continue working at Kongsberg, and he starts working on a model of 1911 pistol. This one is a rotating bolt pistol. Now, rifle trials or pistol trials are coming up in 1914, and ultimately what Norway would adopt was the Colt model of 1911 under the designation model 1914. Very cool pistol. But Bjorgum really wants to get into these trials, and he manages to kind of force his way back into the Kongsberg factory some more. At this point, he's now working at cost. He's paying his own way. So the time and the machining time and the employee time that he's using to help him, they're charging back to him. And they end up, he had been payrolled as an employee for a while, and half of the money he earned as an employee ended up going back to the factory for his continued work on his 1914 model pistol, which is ultimately, like all the others, written off as being just totally unserviceable. By the time the 1914 trials arrive, this is like his worst attempt yet. He presents a not quite completed gun that doesn't work right. He presents two barrels for it, a 9mm barrel and a 10.15mm barrel. Neither one of these barrels is for a cartridge that actually exists, which is a problem. The thing's it's a garbage fire. It's a hot mess. It's a real disaster. It turns out, ultimately, Parliament was kind of looking into this, and really the only reason he had gotten nearly this far so many times was that he was one of the very few Norwegian domestic arms designers who looked like he might actually be able to put together a working pistol. And the Norwegian military would have really liked to have an indigenous pistol design to adopt and issue, rather than having to go outside the country to Europe or the United States for a gun. So they were kind of allowing him to continue only for that reason. Ultimately, the Parliament finally completely pulled the plug on him in 1915, cut off all his funding, and basically threw him out. In 1916, he formed his own firearms manufacturing company. He went back to looking more at rifles. Well, they didn't like his rifle either. He ended up spending 1917 and 1918 in the United States. He appears to have converted his rifle to .30-06 caliber, tried to interest the United States in it, and that went nowhere. Ultimately, his company was dissolved. It was totally bankrupt in 1923 or 1921. It's a little unclear which. And at that point, he kind of retired from the gun-making business and went back to painting. And I think successfully, as far as I can tell. And he would live another 28 years, dying in 1949. Just a really interesting character here. The artist turned totally failed gunmaker, turned back to artist. So, having gone through the background story here, let's take a closer look at this pistol, because it's different and weird, and oh boy, it's not really a good gun. All right, so the Bjorgum, which I think is a 1905. It might be a 1914, but I think it's a 1905. Now, what we have going on here is a rotating barrel. We have 3 locking lugs to lock. The magazine is back here. Trigger. This is the safety, sort of. This is the fire position. When we rotate it down, we have the safe position. This is, however, a terrifyingly bad safety, because if you pull the trigger with the safety engaged, it won't fire until you disengage the safety, at which point the hammer will immediately drop. That's a really bad failure of a safety. In fact, I can show you that right now. This is the hammer here, recessed in there. I can pull the trigger there. You can see the trigger actually went back a little bit, and then I'm going to hold it down so it doesn't snap. When I re-engage the safety, oh look, there it comes. Boom, to fire. That's assuming, of course, that it would successfully fire, which is not necessarily a given. So I'm going to recock the hammer by hand. There you go, until it clicks. The hammer sits down there. Now, when this cycles, what I'm going to do is push the barrel back, and you can see that it rotates. So when I push the barrel back as if it's cycling, you can see that the barrel rotates. We've got a curved lug right here that causes it to do that. And the barrel goes back about that far. Now the front sight is permanently fixed to the barrel, or pinned to the barrel, so when the barrel rotates and retreats backwards, the front sight gets cocked off to one side. Now at this point the action is unlocked, and what I have to do is pull this cover plate backwards to open the bolt. There you go. We have a spring in here, but it doesn't really pick up until about this point, which is probably because it's a very old spring and it was probably not well made in the first place. Now, looking up close here, you can see that there are 3 sets of interrupted thread type locking lugs. So there's 4 actual lugs in each of those sets. There's one at the very bottom and then 2 up on top here. At the very top we have our extractor, there's a firing pin in the middle, and then this guy is the ejector. So this is going to sit back until this lug hits that tab, at which point this will kick forward, which in theory kicks the cartridge case out. Now obviously this isn't fully cycled. This continues backward all the way to here. All the way to here. We have our magazine right there. That, in theory, there's a drawing of this in the one reference book that describes this pistol. This magazine appears to hold 16 rounds of 30 Mauser, 7.62 Mauser, 7.62 by 25 ammunition. Now, in the testing reports, they mentioned that this was very difficult to load with stripper clips, which makes sense because you're going to need 2 8-round clips, and this is under quite a bit of spring tension right now. And to load it, you would have to pull this back, and it kind of takes 2 hands, one to hold the gun, one to hold this back, and then you have to stuff a stripper clip in there with your 3rd hand, which presumably holds, that stripper clip would hold the slide back. But that gives you 8 rounds, and then you have to somehow pull that clip out and put another clip in to load it all the way up to capacity. And that seems very difficult. So not sure how that was supposed to happen. Now this cover is just a very thin sheet metal cover. This whole grip assembly is a very thin sheet metal grip. You can see that it's kind of folded together and spot welded down here. It is cut for a shoulder stock, which is kind of interesting. But this whole thing feels honestly like a toy. It's extremely lightweight. It's clearly all made out of sheet metal. The chamber here is really quite thin. The bolt is very low mass. I would be extremely surprised if this were safe to fire for any sustained period of time. Now, one of the advantages listed in one of the letters to Parliament sent on Bjorgum's behalf was that this pistol was very lightweight. And you know what? It is. It's substantially lighter than anything else that would have been competing, especially anything with a locked breech and a substantial power cartridge. But you know, to a certain extent, you really need some mass in these parts in order to work safely and properly, and I don't think Bjorgum's pistol had enough of that. Now it does have 2 rails in here, and this, I assume, is where the springs are located. You can see we've got 2 guide rods right here, one on either side, and then I'm assuming that there are little coil springs in here that are being compressed into this space. If we look at the front, there's a little sheet metal cap on there. I expect you would push down on this. Yeah, that retracts easily. You probably push down on that and push it out of the way or something, and this comes out. I don't know exactly how to field strip this thing, and to be honest, I'm not that eager to go trying because this doesn't seem like the sort of pistol that is particularly durable, and I don't want to be the guy who breaks it. So I think we can pretty clearly see here why Bjorgum was ultimately totally rebuffed by the Norwegian Parliament and the Norwegian military. In fact, it's really quite surprising that he managed to get funding and money for as long as he did, if this is the sort of quality of gun that he was producing, which it really seems to be. That this is exactly the sort of thing that he was producing. Really, actually, kind of a testament to how badly the Norwegians really would have liked to have a domestically designed and manufactured pistol. So, unfortunately, they were not going to end up with that. Fortunately for them, though, they did end up with the Colt 1911, which is a very good pistol for the time period. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I want to throw a big thank you out there to 2 very helpful Norwegian viewers, Aaron and Eric, who very graciously spent a bunch of their time helping me to translate information out of this book, Kongsverd Colten by Hannevik, which is pretty much the only source of information on Bjorgum and his pistol. So if it weren't for those guys, we wouldn't have a video because I wouldn't know anything about this gun. Now, if you're interested in this particular pistol or Bjorgum himself or any of the other guns that were experimented with by Norway around the time of the 1914 trials, or of course the main subject of this book, the 1914 Norwegian Colt, definitely pick a copy of this up. You can still get them. They're not completely sold out yet, but I'm sure they will be before too long. This is another very niche book. But ton of great info in it. It is all in Norwegian though, so be aware. Anyway, thank you very much to Aaron and Eric for their help. If you enjoyed this sort of content, please do consider checking out my Patreon page. It's funding from folks like you at a buck a month there that makes it possible for me to travel about, find weird old guns like this one, and show them to you guys. Thanks for watching. Very much outside the box, yes. He was definitely thinking outside the box. It's a happy box. There's a reason to be in the box. He did not want to be in the box.